Welcome back to the second half of the Future Show here on the TD Ameritrade Network. We're less than 60 minutes away from the cash open for stocks on Wall Street. This morning, Scott Bauer, the CEO of Prosper Trading Academy, joins us to talk commodities. Scott, welcome. Before we get into what's playing out in terms of markets, energies, metals, and grains for that matter, I want to get your thoughts on. First and foremost, we started this morning off talking about this President Biden, President Xi Jinping meeting, summit, virtual summit tonight, I should say, and how we're not expecting any seismic changes to come from it, but it could, at the very least, help support markets, or if we get some sort of, outlier, derail potentially some of the sentiment we're seeing, but certainly a focal point to begin the week, nonetheless.
It absolutely is, Ben. And I really think, as you just said, it's more about optics than anything else. I don't think we're going to get any sort of definitive, roadmap on anything from trade to energy. I don't think anything like that is going to come out of it. But I do think the markets will react to, what the press says about this meeting. Was it a good meeting? Mm-hmm. Are they cordial? Are they on the same page? So I think it's really more about optics. And I don't really see it as market moving unless, like you said, there is something that derails any further potential thoughts.
Some sort of a joint statement or lack thereof maybe will be a focal point tomorrow morning. But ultimately, I heard that really the focus is going to be on climate, and which brings us into the energies ultimately. I mean, because they have been, rallying recently up to 85. We looked at the move lower before we went into break as far as some of the price decay we've seen, back down below 80 overnight. But many kind of point to some of the policies the Biden administration's enacted as of recent, again, relative to what we'd seen throughout the Trump administration, this lack of dependency on foreign oil versus as of recent, you have the Biden administration kind of asking and pleading to members of OPEC to increase production ultimately. But really it ties back to price increases at the pump, price increases in terms of heating oil, in terms of WTI. I mean, ultimately, this is what has inflation concerns on the rise.
Yeah, there's no question about that. But, right now, front and center, there's a lot of push and pull, if you will. You've got the big inflation concerns and, prices at the pump, as you said, just absolutely, ridiculously expensive. But when you break this down, you've got a couple things maybe fighting for lower oil prices. Number one is obviously the overhang of whether the Biden administration is going to tap the SPR. That's number one. If they come out and they say they're not going to, look out to the upside.
Yeah, big time.
I think that's helping to maybe cap some of the prices.
Good point.
Two, you just got OPEC Plus downgrading demand for Q4. And a lot of that, unfortunately, is based on another COVID surge overseas. So you've got that also maybe keeping a lid on prices just a little bit. And then, of course, you've got the stronger dollar here. That all being said, though, the bottom line is we're all paying, severely at the pump right now. And it's really anyone's guess as to what is going to happen here. My best guesstimate is I think we hit 75 before we hit 85. And we're right in the middle there. I would bet on the lower number than, happening first before the higher number.
Scott, 75 before 85. You mentioned strategic petroleum reserves, and again, the idea that, ultimately, if they don't release them, how we could see some movement to the upside. What about if they do release them? Has this been priced in? You mentioned how this has kind of helped sort of limit the upside momentum we had seen, the trajectory, but if they do release them, maybe more than expected, or certainly the headline should be watched. You get that intraday volatility and reaction to most times.
Yeah, and I don't think that would be a buy the rumor, sell the news. I do think there's a little bit, holding prices firm or steady, not rising. But if they make an announcement that they're going to release it, I think you could see a quick, 3-4% drop in the price of oil.
All right, we'll keep an eye on potentially 75 before 85. We're right in the middle of that range right now. Scott, gold rallied last week, even amidst dollar strength. While it might be slowing some of that momentum to the upside in crude, it certainly hasn't slowed the rally in forward/GC.
No, it really hasn't. And maybe more so now than any time over the last couple of years, especially as Bitcoin and crypto has become more and more in favor of an inflation hedge. Now the old purists are really stepping up to the forefront and saying, you know what, in this environment, gold is that inflation hedge. And, we are seeing a little bit of a pullback, although you just noted that it just ticked positive. I think it had been negative all night. And, this rally looked to continue here, especially after the aftermath, what we saw last week with the inflation numbers, CPI numbers. Gold is in favor right now. Is it in favor to get back to those highs, around 2000? Probably not, but certainly all these economic data points that we're getting pointing to persistent inflation is giving gold tailwinds.
One of those data points, if we could just pull it up here, actually it's on the lower third. If we could take a look, though, on a full screen, the Empire State Manufacturing, this is the chart of gold as Scott was just speaking to the bid, the breakout to the upside. We're holding above the 50-day moving average. But Scott, we just had a number this morning, and we were talking about a busy week to come here, how retail sales, certainly the major focal point. There it is, New York manufacturing at 30.9, well above estimates, prior at 19.8. It seems like the numbers in the U.S., while we kind of lost some of the momentum in terms of the beats, are coming back into play after a really strong jobs report, some good weekly numbers on the jobless front. I mean, okay, you mentioned the inflation number, a major concern there, but strong numbers across the board here in terms of the U.S. getting back on track.
Absolutely, Ben. Outside of what we saw at the end of last week with consumer sentiment, which I actually...
That was a major miss, you're right.
It was a major miss, and I think that's a one-off.
Yeah,
but this week's retail sales numbers are going to be really important. We just got the numbers out of China last night. They were better than expected. I don't know how that is going to reflect what we have here, but this is so important right now, maybe more so than any time over the last 9-10 months or so, because we've got to see what the consumer is like heading into this holiday season. This is huge, but as you said, economic numbers across the board, with the exception of the inflation numbers, have been pretty solid.
Certainly we know the significance, the importance of the holiday season for these retailers. Scott, infrastructure, moving away from gold into more silver, copper. We have some housing numbers this week. Copper getting a little bit of a lift from the signage of the bill. I think it was a week ago this past Friday. So what are you watching there in terms of metals aside from gold?
Yeah, in the copper space, obviously the infrastructure deal, it should be a positive, but I think you're also starting to get again, a little bit of negativity in copper because of what's going on in China. There's a lot of worries there in China, the property crisis going on, the real estate sector, which accounts for a major share of the copper consumption in China. And China is the largest, consumer of copper in the world. So I think that's putting a little bit of a cap here. But down the road, in the long run, I think both for copper and silver, I think the infrastructure deal is a positive.
Yeah, we were talking about economic data out of Asia a minute ago earlier in the show, and how it just hasn't really reflected some of the recovery efforts that we'd like to see, or progress in recovery. It's been very mixed still. And you bring up a good point. Copper kind of lost some of its momentum earlier this spring, up around 48, as some of the COVID numbers and concerns tied to Asia, as again, they are such a huge factor in that discussion. As you mentioned, Scott, the largest importer. Scott Bauer, always appreciate you joining us. And thanks for giving us a Monday morning. This week, Scott Bauer, the CEO of Prosper Trading Academy, sharing part of his with us.